Who owns the float in a construction contract? I don't know why this makes me think of a lazy river and who's in the float going down the river. But that's not what we're talking about here. No, in this episode, we're going to be talking about construction float and who owns it. And float is going to be that contingency of time that we're going to need in the project to ensure the project gets done on time. Now, there's a lot of key strategies in making sure that you manage float, and so in this episode, I'm going to give you the secrets to who owns the float. Today we're going to be talking about what is float, who owns the float, what do you do with the float, and how do you manage float. So in this episode, we're going to go into all of the key strategies necessary in order to be able to understand what to do with that extra time that we're calling float. So what is this float we're talking of, you ask? Well, I will tell you, float can be a little bit confusing. There are many different types of float in a construction project. And unfortunately, most people don't understand float the way that it should be understood. If you're a scheduler, understanding float is going to be really important, and the different types of float are actually going to be aligned with different stakeholders in the project. But today we're just going to keep it simple. We're just going to talk about float in the general in order to be able to give you an understanding. So float is going to basically be our contingency. So in our other videos, you'll find that we talk about contingency and we talk about it in the matter of cost and using it in an estimate, and being able to have a pot of money or a piggy bank for that rainy day or when something bad happens. So that's similar to what float is in a schedule. It's going to be time that we are going to have for a rainy day. The only thing is that it is providing us with an opportunity to be able to ensure that what we're installing is going to be at the highest quality possible for the amount of money that's been designated to complete that particular task. So when we talk about float, it is really important in construction because this gives us an opportunity to have some leadway in some things that make it difficult in a construction project. So float is going to work almost the same as our contingency works in an estimate. It's providing some extra days of cushion in order for us to be able to complete this specific task. Then what happens is when we run up against the deadline of that task and it becomes a critical activity, we no longer have float in that particular task. So that means that we either have to get done when that deadline is in place, or we need to borrow float from another activity, which is something we do not want to do because that would be like stealing. So when we're talking about float, when we look at the whole duration of the contract from start to finish, the contractor has identified a specific number of days that they say it's going to take for them to complete this job. Those days are going to fall short of the actual days of the entire contract. Now, when we identify days in a contract, often we do that in what's called calendar days. That means every day is counted. So in a contract, I might identify 200 calendar days for the completion of this project. That means that the contractor then needs to go in and identify how many Saturdays and Sundays are in that, how many holidays are in that, and how many actual work days is it going to take for them to complete this project. So when we come up with the number of work days to complete this project, so the remainder of the days can either be identified as float, or they would be identified as days that cause additional cost due to acceleration or for overtime that needs to take place during those days. So when we're looking at the float in a project, we're going to be looking at days outside of the critical path. So that duration of work days that the contractor said from start to finish it will take for them to complete the project, those are going to be aligned with what we call critical path events, that as soon as one item or task is completed, the next one has to start in order for the project to end at the completion date. When the contractor is trying to put a cushion in each of those tasks or activities, they will include something called float. Now, often float is something that people don't want to share. The contractor doesn't want to really tell how many extra days he's put into a task. The subcontractor doesn't want to tell the contractor how many extra days of cushion they put into the task. And the owner wants to know why the task isn't done when the contractor said it would be. And the contractor's not worried about it because they know they have extra days in float, but the owner sees the contract schedule and feels like the project's running behind schedule. So it's kind of a game of chicken that we're playing here, but the whole purpose for it is to be able to make sure that we ensure protections on our individual task items that allow us to overperform in a way that if we get done early, it makes us look like a hero. But if we don't get done quite on time, but we had 2 days of float that no one knew about, if we get done when the owner thinks we were supposed to get done, then we still have turned over a good product. Now, because this is such a hot topic, we're going to want to know who owns that float. Now, the owner really is going to say that they own the float. They're the ones paying the bill. The contractor is going to say they own the float. They're the ones who inserted it into the schedule in order to be able to make sure they had a cushion. I, the construction manager, would argue that whoever gets to the float first is the one who gets to win the float. So what does that mean? Well, that means that if the contractor is able to complete his work in those 2 or 3 days and is able to get to the float and still have 2 to 3 days of breathing room, then they are going to be the ones who are going to want to claim the float. Now, the owner doesn't need to claim float unless there's some kind of new agreement that has come into the contract, because the contract clearly shows an end date for the project. And so the owner doesn't need to have float in that because they have identified when they're willing to accept the project at the end of completion. So the float really is there in order to be able to keep the contractor on task and make sure that there are no costs for acceleration. So one of the things that we need to do as a construction manager is just make sure that the float is being used properly. We don't want to have a contractor that has a bunch of extra days of float and sits there with no progression of work and then comes back and tries to ask for a change order for a delay in the schedule after the project due date has passed. So for these reasons, we want to be very careful of how we manage float. There's always going to be an argument of who owns the float, but I would say that just as long as everyone on the team recognizes the importance of float, the importance of managing it so that we have effective, highly efficient projects with high quality deliverables, then everyone on the construction team is going to own the float. So we've been able to learn how float is going to be able to manage delays and how contentious float can be in a project. And so the understanding of what float is and how it can be used as a cushion to be able to protect the quality that we have going into our projects is going to be very important when we're managing that critical path in our construction projects. So we've learned a little bit about float, why it's contentious, why we want to see who is going to be the owner of the float, how it can manage the delays in a project, and being able to move forward in managing float and being able to really successfully see your project to the end, I invite you to look in our description and sign up for our next 5-day workshop where we go through everything that you need to know in construction management essentials. We'll be able to talk about budget and time and how that also all plays into the role of establishing opportunities for float in your schedule. So check us out on our website at Construction Management Online.